Hi, thanks for joining me today. Would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Havala Pye. I'm a research scientist at the US EPA, or the Environmental Protection Agency, and I'm specifically in the Office of Research and Development. So I do research to support the agency.
Okay, great. So, can you talk about your work and what you do at the EPA?
Sure. So as a research scientist, I work in research and development, and overall EPA's goal is to protect human health and the environment. And what I do is to create tools and scientific information to support how EPA accomplishes that mission. And more specifically, what I do is I develop computer models that allow us to link emissions of compounds to airborne concentrations so we can understand the implications of those concentrations.
Okay, yeah, definitely. So, I know in college you studied chemical engineering. So, can you kind of talk about when you started to get the angle of climate change on chemical engineering and kind of when you transitioned to more of this like computerized work that you talked about?
Sure. And I'll say my interests are very broadly environmental science, which includes climate change, along with things like public health. And from a very young age, I knew I wanted to do something to make the world a better place. My mom had a huge influence on me and really taught me to appreciate the natural world. So we would do things like pick up the trash alongside the road where we lived. We did a lot of outdoor activities, camping, biking, and other things. And so I had just like this appreciation for wanting to make sure that environment was available for other people to enjoy. And as I was selecting what I wanted to work on, uh, I really liked the idea of chemical engineering, and chemical engineering became tied with climate change for me in a graduate school project. So I worked on what was called the GCAP, or Global Change in Air Pollution Project. It was a joint project that had some team members at Harvard, some at my institution, Caltech, and our goal was to understand how climate change would affect future air pollution levels. And to do this, we use computer models, much like the ones I work on now, but we fed them with future meteorological fields that would represent the impacts of climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. So it sounds like, yeah, this project definitely made a big impact on your decision to kind of go into this field. So apart from that, in more early on, kind of in high school or undergrad, were there any experiences that directed you towards climate change, kind of apart from, I know you talked about like your experience with your mom, just maybe a research experience or like a mentor or something like that?
Sure. So I first learned about the field of engineering in high school. Um, there were some students from the local university, Florida State University, that came to my high school, and they talked about the different disciplines. So civil engineering, chemical engineering, industrial, computer, etc. And that's when I really found out there was this whole field of engineering and how science was used in um, designing things of benefit to understanding things like air pollution. And the chemical engineering field really spoke to me because it combined math and chemistry. And I ended up selecting the University of Florida for my undergraduate institution. And one of the early interactions I had was with a professor there who worked in environmental science. And so I talked with her about sort of what I saw as a potential career and what sort of training I would need at the university level in order to get that career. And she was very supportive of engineering as a training field to get broad scientific expertise. And she also highlighted how graduate school could give you specialized training if you have like the specific interest in environmental science or climate change. And that's where I did that specialized training was in graduate school.
Absolutely, that's amazing. So, after graduate school, what was kind of your career path in terms of getting to the EPA?
Um, so after graduate school, I knew I was interested in working in a government lab type capacity. So I was looking at several institutions. I was very interested in EPA. I knew about EPA going back to at least high school, if not previously. So I knew about the type of work that was done there. And I reached out via colleagues of colleagues to find out how people got started at EPA, what they did there. And I was directed to a postdoc program. And so I came to EPA in that postdoc program. It's a training program. So you do work alongside scientists that are at the agency. You find out how they're doing their work, and then you conduct a study. I was essentially on a fellowship. So there was a bit of freedom to decide what was worked on, how it was accomplished in a joint um, connection with my mentor. And so that postdoc position eventually led to a staff position, which is the position I have now.
Yeah, definitely. That's great. So, can you talk a bit about the project that you did with the EPA in this postdoc position?
Sure. So my postdoc position was a quick position.
Mhm.
I was originally scoped to try to understand how we could use satellite data, specifically looking at nitrogen oxides or NOx. So those are commonly combustion byproducts. So sources like vehicles release them, power plants, other high temperature processes have a lot of nitrogen oxides. And it's something that can be observed from a satellite looking at the radiation passing through the atmosphere because that gas interacts with the radiation. And
Mhm.
so I was going to use satellite data to look at where the satellite was seeing nitrogen oxides emissions and how much was being emitted, and then compare that to what our best estimates were based on our internal methods. And so I did those comparisons between that satellite data and the ground-based methods. And there was a lot of technical challenges in terms of the satellite seeing a column of information. We tend to think about emissions at the ground, and then thinking through like how do you code that, how do you represent that in the model, were all things I was working on.
Okay, cool. So, a lot of your work is kind of like data science, is that correct?
Yeah, and it's a model development.
Mm.
And to build models, we need a lot of data so that we can test them and make sure we're parameterizing things correctly. Uh,
Mhm.
the main model I work on is in Fortran, which was actually not a language I knew in undergrad. I took a general programming language course just to like learn the logic and structure of coding.
Yeah.
But then that easily ported to Fortran. And I tend to use Python a lot for my data processing, visualization. But the Fortran model itself is run on a supercomputer that we have at the agency.
Okay, wow, that's really cool. So, just out of curiosity, do you primarily just kind of do this like data analysis through just Python, or do you also use machine learning models as well?
I have not used a lot of machine learning modules. Our main model, it's called the Community Air Quality Modeling System, or CMAQ. It's a deterministic model. So we put in emissions, so how much, say, nitrogen oxides we think come from cars, and then we parameterize the chemistry of that. So how is that species going to react with things that already are in the atmosphere or from other sources to form products, and then how do those products react? And so there's a lot of elementary reactions in the model, and we parameterize those. It could be like a fundamental laboratory chemistry experiment or
Mhm.
other data sources, and we take all that information across many different sources, code it into this big model, run that model to predict concentrations, and then there are different ways that we analyze it that can involve machine learning, but often I'm using more deterministic methods.
Okay, wow, that's really cool. So, what are some challenges that you faced in pursuing climate change or chemical engineering, or just in general, challenges that you faced in terms of getting to where you are at the EPA?
Sure. And I thought I'd mention a general, uh, I'd say maybe issue that is often experienced by people working in STEM or other fields, and that's imposter syndrome. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but it's an issue where it's a feeling that somehow you don't belong, like somehow you accidentally got to where you are. Somebody wasn't paying attention when they gave you your job, and that you actually don't have the skills to execute your job. And this imposter syndrome feeling often is experienced by people that are very highly qualified
Mhm.
and very expert in their field. So it's not an actual reflection of their ability to conduct their work, but it's something I've experienced at different levels at different times. And it's something that's pretty well recognized and we receive training on now in a lot of environments. So in graduate school, there was a lot of training on how to recognize if you were feeling these imposter syndrome feelings and how to combat them. And so understanding what they are is one of the things you can do, but then also interacting with people in fields that are slightly different than yours gives you the ability to communicate what you do know and helps you realize how much you really do know and that you are an expert and that you are qualified to be doing the work you're doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's great. I have read a bit about imposter syndrome, and I think what you're saying is definitely really important to kind of like take ownership of the fact that you are highly qualified. You do have the means to be where you are. So yeah, I think that's great. So just kind of wrapping it up. So on your EPA profile, you encourage students to take STEM classes and talk to experts in the field. Apart from this, is there anything else you would suggest to aspiring climate like students in high school and undergrad programs?
Sure. So I would recommend always asking for help if you need it. This could be asking for some additional resources to learn a topic. Maybe someone would recommend an online training program for you. It could be asking to take a class in a new area that you want to learn about, or even advice on how to navigate a situation.
Mhm.
And at the undergraduate level, there would be professors available to help you, teaching assistants, and there are tutors as well that could help you if whether it's technical help on learning a concept or like how to navigate a situation or find mentors in other locations. And I'd say asking for help not only helps you, but it helps the mentor. Um, Often mentors are senior to the mentee, but that's not always the case. I've learned a ton from being able to interact with other people and find out, what's challenging them, where do they think maybe things aren't clear, or where do they need more information. And so having that experience actually helps the mentor as well understand, what are people needing that could make their science better, their experience better, or their environment better.
Absolutely. I think that's really important. So, just kind of on that, a follow-up. So, you talked about like, yeah, asking for help from mentors. So, I think a lot of high school students struggle with kind of finding these kinds of mentors in the fields that they want to go into, whether that's like research or kind of more industry. So, is there any advice that you might offer in terms of finding a mentor for students?
Sure. Um, so I actually had some great training on this topic from a collaboration that involved the Earth Science Women's Network. And they actually have a training sheet that I could share with you. But they mentioned that there's no number limit on how many mentors you can have. And you may need mentors that give you different things. So you might need a mentor that's there as a sounding board that you can talk through ideas with, maybe, just get some general support. You may need a mentor that's very technical, that knows your field, knows exactly the science you want to learn and understand, or you may need a mentor for a different function. So um, you don't have to have just one, you can have many. And you also don't have to expect one mentor to give you all those functions. So if you're finding your mentor is really good at one thing, then that's a success. Like you found someone who can really help you in that area, but then you might need a mentor in a different area. Like, for example, if you wanted to know how to get promoted at an organization, maybe you'd select someone different than if you wanted someone that would tell you, how you better understand a particular programming language. Um, and You can find these mentors in different ways. So you can ask your colleagues, like, oh, who have you talked with that's been very knowledgeable about how to code? Or who have you talked with that has experience in the upper levels of management? Or who have you talked with that has been able to maybe had a unique career path? And can you connect me with that person? So there are different ways of finding them, and you don't need just one mentor. And it's also okay if you have a mentor and they fulfill a specific need for a specific amount of time. So maybe you have a mentor for 3 months for a very specific reason, and you might touch base with them again in 3 years, but you don't have to continually meet with them if that sort of fulfilled its need.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's great advice. And I think that could definitely help a lot of aspiring students, not only in the climate field, but just in all STEM fields in general. So, yeah, thank you so much for taking the time to do this interview today. It's been really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you for reaching out.
Of course.